Hey everyone, this is Pallavi and today I'm going to show the ninth game of the book Logical Chess Move by Move by Irving Chernev. The opening played in this game was Ruy-Lopez and we will learn more about this opening briefly along with few more principles of chess and logical reasons behind every move. Let's start. So this game was played between Znosko-Borovsky and Mackenzie. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. It was played in Weston-super-Mare, a town in England in 1924. So white started with e4. White is controlling the center and also making way for the queen and bishop to come out and also controlling c5 and f5 square. Black played e5. Black also controlling half of the center and also making way for his queen and bishop to come out and also controlling d4 square and f4 square. White played knight f3, developing towards the center and also attacking the pawn on e5. Now black played knight to c6. Black also developing towards the center and also supporting his pawn on e5, controlling the d4 square as well. Black played, now white played bishop to b5. The most natural move on the board, white strikes at the defender of the e5 pawn, this knight. It is true that he cannot win the pawn after bishop cross c6, d cross c6 and knight cross e5 because queen d4, attacking the knight and the pawn. So hence black regains the pawn, but after bishop to b5, the pressure on black is constant and the threat is always in the air. The Ruy-Lopez is probably the strongest of all kingside openings, and white has more to say in the center since he will be able to play d4 and without much trouble, while black will find it difficult to achieve d5. White's pieces have more room to move around, and while black's game is considerably cramped in many variations. So after bishop b5, black played a6. Black's purpose is to dislodge the bishop from its favorable post, and the loss of time involved in moving a pawn is compensated for by the fact that the threatened bishop must also lose a move in retreating. So here white played bishop to a4, maintaining the pressure on the knight. Black played knight to f6, develops towards the center and also attacks the pawn on e4 and also making way for the king to castle later on when the bishop gets developed. Now white played short castle, following the rule castle as early as possible so that the king is safe and the rook is now activated. Now black played bishop to e7. This move leads to a blocked position, difficult to break through but requires patience on black's part. The bishop has moved only one square away from home, but the important thing is that it has left the back rank and facilitated castling. So after bishop e7, actually here if black had played knight cross e4, white would play rook e1, regaining the pawn, and also white will have an open position to attack from. So that's why after short castle, black played bishop to e7. Now white played rook e1, brings the rook towards the center and also supporting his e4 pawn, placing the rook on a file which is likely to get opened. White renews the threat of bishop cross c6, d cross c6 and knight cross e5, gaining a pawn. So black played b5. After rook e1, black played b5. White parries the threat and attacks the bishop, forcing it to move back. White played bishop b3, the only move. Now black played d6, protects the e-pawn and makes way for the bishop to come out and prepares for knight a5 to remove the troublesome bishop on b3. So here after d6, white played c3. Provides refuge for b3 bishop to c2 against knight to a5. Also establishing a strong pawn center when he goes to d4. The c3 pawn will be protecting the d4 pawn, supporting the advance of this d4 pawn. So after c3, now black played knight a5, not just to attack the b3 bishop but also to make way for the c5 pawn to push to c5 to dispute control of the central squares. In this line of Ruy-Lopez, black's best counter chances lie in action on the queen side. So here after knight a5, white played bishop to c2. Naturally, white wants to keep both bishops. He loses a tempo, but black's knight is also posted at the side of the board, and that compensates the loss of tempo. So here black played c5. Black intensifies his pressure on the d4 square and provides way for the queen. So here white played d4 as planned. One of the chief objectives in king's pawn opening is to advance the d-pawn to the center as soon as circumstances permit. White again threatens to win the e-pawn by the double attack on it. White wants to capture this e5 pawn. This knight and pawn both are attacking. So after d4, black played queen to c7, develops the queen and protects the e5 pawn. Now, had black played e cross d4 instead of queen c7, then c takes d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, black surrenders the center and leaves black with an isolated pawn on d6. So that is why black played queen c7, did not capture the pawn on d4. Now white played h3 to prevent black from playing bishop to g4, and which will pin the knight on f3. The defender of the d4 pawn. Now a question, is white violating the principle in moving one of the pawns near the king? Maybe, but in this particular situation, it is important to prevent an attack on the knight, its subsequent exchange and breakup of white's pawn in the center. The move of the h pawn is weakening, but black cannot exploit it right now. A move is weak only if the opponent can use the advantage of its imperfections. So here black played knight to c6. The knight returns and adds pressure to the d pawn. Also, black is now threatening to play e cross d4, c cross d4 and c cross d4, gaining a pawn. And if white captures knight cross d4, then black will capture knight cross d4, queen cross d4 and queen cross c2, gains black a piece. That's why after knight c6, now white played bishop to e3, develops and also supports the pawn on d4. Also black is, after bishop e3, now black played castle. So this is a king safety move, also activates the rook. Now white played knight b d2. The knight move clears the first rank and enables the major pieces, the queen and the rooks, to get in touch with each other. And also the knight is now developed and connected with another knight. Now black played bishop to d7. Black also develops his bishop to vacate the back rank and connect his rooks so that they can control the central lines. Now white played rook to c1, getting the rook out of the corner and placing them on a file which is likely to get opened. Now black played knight to e8. Planning to play f5, the f pawn will be moving so that the pawn will dispute the center with white's e pawn and it will open up the f file for the rook to attack from. So after knight e8, white played knight to f1. The knight retreats to gain momentum for a leap to g3 and then f5. A beautiful outpost. So black played g6. Not a good move, not only to keep the knight out but also to support the f5 pawn push. But it has created weaknesses on f6 and h6 squares as they are no longer guarded by the pawn. Now white played bishop to h6. White immediately anchors a piece on one of the vulnerable kingside squares and also attacks the f8 rook. Now black played knight to g7. Only move to prevent the loss of the exchange by bishop cross f8. Now white played knight to e3. The knight comes back into the game by a slightly different route than was planned earlier. Not only does it add to the pressure, but it also threatens to settle down powerfully on that square, the d5 square. Now black played rook a e8. Black could not stop the knight coming in by bishop e6 as d5 wins a piece. He also abandons the contemplated break by f pawn f5 as it opens the position, and open lines favor the player whose development is superior and who is better equipped to use these lines in an attack. So with rook a e8, black tries to keep a tightly knit defensive position, one that is difficult to break through. So white played knight to d5. Centralized knight attacking the queen and also weak squares on king side. Now black played queen to b7. Now white played knight cross e7 check. White gives up the strong position of the knight and captures the bishop to remove the defender of the weakened f6 square. Now there is no defense on the f6 square. After this, black played rook cross e7. It was forced as knight cross e7, d cross e5, d cross e5, knight cross e5 costs a pawn. So after rook cross e7, white played d cross c5. The purpose of this exchange is to open up the d file for the queen. Now black played d cross c5, otherwise black would have lost a pawn. Now white played queen to d6. Beautiful exploitation of the d file, open d file and attack on the c pawn. Gains a tempo towards the queen's entry at f6. After queen d6, black played c4, saves his pawn. Now white played queen f6, threatens to checkmate by queen cross g7, and tries to drive here, also controlling the weakened squares. After queen f6, now black played knight to h5. Black stops the checkmate and threats the queen, threatening the queen to capture. And now white played queen to h4, so that no one can attack the queen again, yet still on the king side. Had white played queen to g5, then black would play f6, again attacking the queen and also supporting the e5 pawn and blocks the diagonal of the queen. So that's why after queen h4, now black played knight to g7. Blocks the attack from bishop to the rook, also prepares to counter queen f6 by knight h5, and then again queen h4, repeating the moves to harass the queen. So after knight g7, white played bishop to e3, rearranging his pieces and bringing up the reserves. The immediate threat is to play bishop to c5, and both the rooks will be under attack. It's a skewer. So after bishop e3, black played knight to e6, preventing bishop c5. Now white played queen to f6, attacking the e5 pawn and again getting control of the weak squares, which is the f6 square. As black cannot play knight to g7, if black plays knight g7, then bishop c5 and rook e6, then queen h4, and then rook f e8 and knight g5. Double attack, attacking the rook and also threatening to checkmate. So after queen f6, now black played queen to c7, supporting the valuable e-pawn. Now after this, white played bishop to h6, firmly plants the bishop on weak square, threatens to capture bishop cross f8. After this, black played rook to c8, saves his rook as black cannot play knight g7 because of queen cross g7 and checkmate. So after rook to c8, now white played rook c d1, seizes the open d file. Next step would be rook to d5 and attacking the e5 pawn for the third time with rook, knight and queen. And also, if possible, white can double up the rook by playing rook e d1. So after rook c d1, black played rook e e8, planning to play queen d8 and offer to exchange the queens and reduce the attack. Now white played knight to h2, a good move, rerouting the knight to get control of the dark squares. Black played queen d8, offers to exchange the queens. Now white played knight to g4, supports the queen and is ready to dominate the dark squares. So after knight g4, black played queen to e7. Had black played queen cross f6, then knight cross f6 check and it's a fork. Had black played rook e7, then bishop e3, threatening to play knight h6 check, king f8 and queen h8 checkmate. So after queen e7, now white played queen cross e7 and black resigned. Because of if rook captures e7, then rook cross d7, knight f6 check, king h8, knight takes d7, gaining a piece. So from this game, we learned that the principles: occupy the center with pawns, develop your pieces towards the center, castle as early as possible, whenever possible, develop with a threat. Do not weaken the pawn structure in front of your castled king. Every undefended square created by advancing a pawn creates weakness. Get your rooks out of the corner and place on open files or files likely to be opened. And occupy weak squares or holes in enemy's position with your pieces. A move is weak only if the opponent can turn its imperfections to his advantage. Whenever possible, double up your rooks on an open file. So these are the principles we learned from this game. I hope you understood and learned from this game. Thank you for watching, and please like, comment, share and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you in my next video. Thank you. Bye.